So we are rolling right into 2021 now. We are up to episode 11 in my Storytime in the Bakery series. It's been a pretty incredible journey if you've been listening from episode 1, where I started off around 2005 when I first bought my bakery, all the way to late 2014 when I finally sold it. The nightmarish stories that went along with that decade are quite unbelievable, along with 4 YouTube channel restarts in just 6 years. And then in 2016, my major switch to vegan. So I ended up the last episode with that giant story of the final frontier in my relationship chaos that was always sort of paralleling my bakery and business chaos. So that relationship with the narcissist that nearly ended me, I do want to say thanks to everyone for all the amazing comments. I'm really glad that you're appreciating the more personal stories that were just sort of like always going alongside my endless strive to continue my bakery business, even after selling the bakery. You know, even though it's not a real brick and mortar bakery, I still have my online presence, and I've been able to continue teaching baking, which seems to be still and always was my number one passion. So I've definitely come out the other side of a serious battle in both business and relationships. And I'm definitely worn and scarred, but by December of 2020, when I made the final decision to get the hell off of that crazy train, I packed up my little teddy bear with nothing but the clothes on our backs and into another apartment. We went and I set up once again to put the pieces back together. So I didn't mention this in the last video, but the last thing that Dudu said to me when he realized that I was really done this time, with venom dripping from his lips, he said, "I can't wait to see you fail even more than you've failed at everything in your life already." But you know, it's funny, I've never really felt like a failure. Like, the bakery was not a failure. It was just a really hard time. And after 10 years in there, I definitely made it better than it was when I bought it. And I didn't die in the process. So to me, that was a victory. Even though my YouTube channels never actually did what I'd hoped in terms of making money or actually making a career that I could rely on to pay the bills, I never really thought of this as failing either. I don't know, I guess because most people measure success by the amount of money that they have in the bank. And for me, success comes in the form of happiness. And man, oh man, by that measure, I am the all-time champion of the world by now, because at this point in my life, with barely a dollar to my name, I had never felt so successful. I know some of you who've also been in narcissistic relationships had commented in on that last video, and I really do appreciate you sharing your experiences. It's something that if you've never been in one, it's just really hard for anyone to imagine what it's like. And so you can bet that I was happier than I'd ever been just by getting out of that, and the sense of freedom and possibility of what's to come was so exciting to me. Again, there's that fool, remember, stepping off the cliff, looking up into the sky, dreaming about what's next. But I was at this point working for Laura, and then of course working on my YouTube channel. I don't know, I just can't let this thing go. So I started working out at the gym again, and then I would stop off at the beach for 20 minutes or so each day. Like, I was literally 10 minutes from the beach where I was living. You know, there's just something about the Florida sun that makes everything feel all right. And my little Ted got the surgery he finally needed that for some reason no vet in New Jersey from the time I adopted him could figure out what was going on with him. And so we were both just really doing great. And here is where the life that I'm living now actually started to take form. So remember I told you in the last one that Laura gifted me a gratitude book. I highly recommend doing this for every single one of this. Like every single day, it is just the best thing. If you could wake up and before you even get out of bed, just take a minute to write or even just think about something that you're grateful for. By recognizing something, anything, even if it's like, I can't think of anything that I'm grateful for because I am in a bad mood or life is just not going great. Like as simple as, I'm thankful that I had this pillow to sleep on last night. Like, trust me, this will do wonders for your day and your life. So every single day I did this, and sometimes it was really as small as that pillow. And sometimes it was as important as I am grateful for this amazing experience called life. So, okay, here we are in the winter of 2021. And I have a very good friend, Frank, who I met back in 2011. I don't know if you noticed in one video when I was talking about the man-child relationship, I featured him. I told you guys to remember him for later. And so he was actually the best friend of man-child way back in 2011. And all three of us would hang around together in the gym, outside of the gym, going out for dinner, hanging out at my house. Like it was often the three of us doing everything together. And even through the numerous times where man-child and I would have our breakups and separations, Frank and I always remained good friends. He always took a neutral position regarding anything going on with me and man-child, but also we didn't really publicize our dramas to anyone. It was always sort of just like, oh, Gretchen and Chris broke up again, not surprising. But the funny thing about this threesome, I probably shouldn't call it a threesome. It wasn't a threesome, it was actually a trio. Oh God. So the funny thing about our friendship was that Frank and I always just had so many laughs together. When the three of us were together, it always just seemed like Frank and I were always just connecting on a different level. We were always just sort of on the same page about things. Our conversations were deeper. The connection just always seemed more fitting. But you know, we never acknowledged that out loud because, well, I was taken and he was the best friend. So around this time, it was 2011, 12. I don't know who remembers the Walking Dead series. I don't even know if it's still on today. Like, how dragged out was that series? But I watched it. It was the most watched series on television, and I actually watched it for several seasons. And I'd always think to myself that if Chris was Rick and he went into a coma, he would wake up to find me and Frank would be like Shane and Lori. We'd be all matched up doing life together, fighting zombies, you know. So that was always just like my little secret daydream that I'd have. So even after the final breakup of man-child and I back in 2016, of course, Frank and I kept in contact as always. And he'd actually moved to South Carolina right around the same time I moved to Florida in 2015. But once I went back to New Jersey, and even while I was with Doo-Doo Head, he would always make a point to come and visit me wherever I happened to be at the time. So, you know, the timing for us just never was right. Like either I was with somebody or he was with somebody, and we both had this tendency to always go back to the dysfunction of our relationships, trying to make it work out. So we do have something in common there. So, except now, I'm talking about 2021, this timing was perfect. We began talking on the phone almost every night once I got into that apartment. And he was also just newly finished with his dragged out relationship. And now remember, this is the start of 2021, and obviously I'm sure we all remember back to early 2021 after an entire year of scamdemic and this new normal that we're all supposed to be getting used to, and everything just felt so weird at that time. Like life just felt really bizarre. I mean, it still kind of does, but I mean especially then. So I know that my experience with 2020 was sort of like a magnifying glass of everything and everyone that just wasn't right in my life. It was almost like a close-up look, and maybe because we were all forced into close quarters with each other. I mean, I don't know. It was sort of like an up close and personal look at people and what side of the fence are you on, basically, with everyone and everything in your life. Well, at least my life. I can't speak for you all, but I know for me it was a bizarre and strange feeling, and I don't know, I feel like so many people were ripped apart at that time. Or maybe not ripped apart, but chose to separate at that time. But also a lot of people came together in a very different way too. So I don't know. I just remember that whole time as like a reconfiguring of the playing field. At least that's what it felt like to me. So anyway, Frank and I would talk on the phone about how bizarre the world is now and basically how difficult it's going to be now that we're both single. And of course, we both still want to have a relationship. Like, he and I have that in common too. It's like we're on this forever quest to just like have the one. And so, but how difficult is it going to be now to actually find that someone? Like, dating is weird enough, but now throw on top of it this craziness that has spun out the entire world. Like, I cringed at the thought of getting back out there, and at 48 years old. So one night on the phone, we were talking about just that, and Frank said, well, you know, maybe we could see if we should maybe get together. I was like, Frank, you and me, playing it off like I'd never had that thought myself, right? Meanwhile, I'm dreaming up visions of me and him as Shane and Laurie in the Walking Dead scenario with my own real life zombie man-child back in 2012. So with that, we made plans to meet up. He was in South Carolina still, and so we picked the date of March 11th for me to go visit my good friend Frank and see how it would feel in person this time. Like, could we actually be more than friends? And if it felt weird and we didn't think that it could be, then the bonus was we'll still just stay friends. So I'm not going to get into those details of that trip, but the short answer is, and for those of you who are up to date with my life, as of last week, you already know that on March 11th, 2024, Frank and I got married. But this did not come without a few speed bumps, and mostly due to my very recent escape from that 5-year narc relationship. 5 months was just not long enough to heal from something as traumatic and, can I say, abusive? Like, yeah, it was. Now, you know me by now. I'm always attributing the universe for the way that everything works out, both good and bad in quotations. One of my mantras is, everything is perfect all the time. Even when we are face down in the dirt or dancing in the clouds, everything is perfect all the time. And another one is whether or not it is clear to us the universe is unfolding as it should. So naturally, when I went to visit Frank in South Carolina in March of 2021, the visit was perfect. We fell in step as we'd always had. And, you know, there's a funny story going all the way back to 2012 when I was still with Manchild, of course, but we were all three of us together as usual. And Frank was single at that time, but, you know, of course, wanting to find the relationship. So I suggested he would go on Match.com, but he didn't want to write the bio about himself, and he just didn't want to do the whole thing about it. So I wrote it for him. Now, I can't really remember the details of what I wrote, but it was literally just gushing about how great of a guy he is. And what I remember most about that was that Manchild was really upset about it. And rightly so, I guess. I mean, here's your girlfriend writing a campaign about how amazing your best friend is and why every woman on earth should probably want to be with him. So that was probably the first indicator of how I felt about Frank. But of course, as I said, we were just never really focused on that thought because the timing of it just wasn't right. So anyway, Frank is still that guy. He's still that guy that everyone on earth would want to be with. He's kind and caring and gentle and loving and strong and generous and, well, just everything that I've ever wanted. But instead, I always went for the complete opposite every time. But back to the universe. We went to stay the weekend at his family's cabin in North Carolina, and this was just so beautiful. But all along, I was recognizing my lifelong need to be with somebody and how I always just filled in that need with whoever came along at the time. And as we already know, with disastrous results. So I was sort of scared to do that again with this one because, you know, doesn't it always feel great at the start of every new relationship? So I was just sort of like reminding myself to not get caught up in the pink cloud of it all. And, you know, be realistic. Like, is this really real? Does this really feel right? So in the morning, I was sitting out on the porch with a cup of coffee, and I asked in my head to the universe, just please tell me where I'm supposed to be. And immediately, without a second of hesitation, an answer came into my head and said, you're already there. So, of course, to me, that was God or the universe talking to me. And, well, you can't argue with God or the universe now, can you? Especially not when we got back to Frank's apartment in South Carolina after the weekend in the mountains with an eviction notice waiting for him. I mean, how much more signals from the universe do we need? So just to clarify, he wasn't getting evicted for any loser reason, but basically the owner of the condo wanted to move in there himself. So he gave Frank 2 weeks notice to find another place to live. And that other place to live, we decided was going to be my apartment in Florida. Talk about leaps of faith. I mean, we both decided in a weekend that we were meant to be. And in just 2 weeks, it was gonna be. So with that, Frank quit his job. He made arrangements to move to Florida to be with me. After all, this wasn't going to work out with a long-distance relationship. We both had done that and just no. And besides, all signs point to yes. So he was able to get an extension, though, on his eviction because, I mean, 2 weeks, come on, that's just ridiculous. And so it's still just mid-March, and I think by the end of April, I was on my way back to South Carolina to drive the U-Haul back to Florida, packed up with Frank's life. Have you ever met anybody who's driven more U-Hauls or moved more times in a single lifetime? I don't think you have. So Florida bound we were with Frank's life, and we melded ourselves together. And it wasn't long before I had a literal meltdown. In retrospect, it's easier to look at it and explain it, what was happening for me, because in that moment, I was just an absolute crazy person, not knowing what and why I was feeling the way that I was. But basically, once he got to Florida with me, I totally freaked out. To put it lightly, I was having what they call buyer's remorse. I was like, oh my God, what have I done? This is all wrong. This was a big mistake. He can't stay here. I don't want this. You know, I think I felt a lot like this was my sanctuary, that I sort of escaped this terrible thing, and this was my solace. And now all of a sudden somebody's coming into my space, and Ted was hating it. Like, Ted did not do well with the integration at first. And so it was just like a lot suddenly of, oh wow, this was a big mistake. And so why was I feeling this way suddenly? Like, for months and months, I've been feeling so good and so ready and so excited. But what I think very plainly, it was because Frank was and is absolutely wonderful. He was always trying to do whatever he could do for me. He was constantly being nice to me. He was constantly loving, to the point that I could vomit. It was so terribly uncomfortable for me that I wanted to run and hide from it. And I remember telling my friend Pat on the phone that I just can't take this. This was a big mistake. Frank just loves me too much. And she stopped me right there and said, that's impossible. There could never be too much love. The problem is, you're still not enough. And she was right. All my life, I was not enough. Playing for love and attention, bending over backwards, and working way too hard to prove myself to everyone that I was good enough and I am lovable. And so for almost 48 years, It became so normal and so familiar to always be doing that and to always have partners that basically validated that I wasn't lovable and I wasn't enough. And so I really knew nothing else. So when I was faced with the real unconditional love that he was showering me with, like real, true, endless love, I couldn't handle it. I didn't know how to handle it. Like, what do you mean you love me and I don't have to do anything for you to get that love? This is wrong and impossible. I was just so much more comfortable with being berated and disrespected. I mean, I totally know how to play that game. But this one, I don't like this one bit. I felt really exposed and I just wanted to hide from it. So by July, I was so shut down emotionally, I couldn't even stand to look at him with all of his love shining for me every day. It was disgusting to me. I mean, I'm laughing now, but it was really a hard thing to go through. I mean, I was a wreck of sadness from it because there was just such conflict happening inside of me. I knew this was everything I ever wanted, but I just could not be with it. And imagine poor Frank, who had just quit his job, moved to another state to be with this now bipolar nightmare of a woman. I mean, his head was spinning, but not once did he ever waver in his love for me. Through it all, he never gave up on me, and I definitely put him through it. He ended up leaving for a break and drove back up to New Jersey to see his mom and his family. And once he got back, we made arrangements for him to leave for good. Like, I was decided that I felt better when he left. Even though that nagging part of me was still missing, it just felt better that he wasn't there. It wasn't in my face anymore that I could actually be loved. So he decided he'd go back to New Jersey to, I guess, pick up the pieces and start over after this girl just shattered his whole world. So I think this is where my oversoul or my angels or guides come in. Like, of course, they were always there watching me make a mess out of my life. But at this point, they were like, okay, we've had enough of this girl. We have watched her get so close to everything she's always wanted so many times just to turn and go down the wrong path. This is getting ridiculous, and it's time to step in, because I'm not quite sure what happened, but just about a week before he was ready to leave for good, I hurt my shoulder to the point that I couldn't even lift it anymore. And the thought of that just terrified me. Like, the thought of being alone, being injured, because how am I going to work if I'm injured? And like, all the terror of everything that I've always lived was right there up in my face. Like, so Frank, being the loving, caring healer that he is, although I'm basically booting him out in a week, he was just still right by my side, still trying to help me and love me. And he nurtured me in a way that I'd probably never been since I was a baby. And I just remember crying and crying and crying like I was a baby in his arms. And I said, I don't want you to leave. And he said, good, because I don't want to leave. And of course, we were both bawling our eyes out, but of course he stayed. Oh, thank God he stayed. So this was July of 2021, and not even 3 months later, he bought us the house we'd both always wanted. You see, way back in 2015, at the height of man-child shenanigans, when I was losing my hair, remember that one, from the stress of trying to keep that relationship together. A side note, how interesting how I'll fight to the death to keep everything that is horrible for me, yet when I'm presented with real, true, unconditional love, I'm like, nope, you gotta go. But anyway, during that time in 2015 was when I had just started doing some law of attraction work. I wrote down, and I wish I still had it, but it doesn't matter, of course. I mean, I remember it all because it's literally everything I've ever wanted, just written down. And then I made a vision board out of some of it. So basically, you just write down all of your dreams, no matter how ridiculous your monkey mind may tell you that your dreams are. You just write it all down as if as if you already have it. So it's sort of like writing it down in first person. Like, I have this beautiful house. I have this wonderful husband. I have all of these things. And the illustrative details I wrote down, all the way from what the house looked like and how each day would unfold with the man of my dreams waking up to coffee and sunrise as we overlooked our property and all the little creatures that were prancing around on it. And then I wrote he'd go off to work as a successful whatever, and I would work from home on my successful YouTube channel and website. Okay, so not everything manifested. But side note here, I did have an epiphany about that, about the not everything manifesting, specifically regarding my YouTube channel and website. And I'll get into that a little bit later about this whole YouTube channel and website as we go on. But basically all of that daydreaming and manifesting back in 2015 was put out to the universe, a perfect vision of me literally dancing. When I'd close my eyes, I would just see like I was made out of stars and I was dancing in the galaxy with my soulmate who was also made out of stars, and we would grab hands and we would just spin around in the blackness of the universe. But the light that was coming from both of us was just so brilliant. So yeah, I could dream amazing, wonderful things for myself, but when it actually came down and comes down to having those things, whew, it takes some work to allow that and accept that for myself. So you know what they say, ask and ye shall receive, and that is nothing short of the truth, and my life is proof of that. But don't forget, ask and ye shall receive goes both ways. The universe responds to your beliefs and your deep-rooted wants, no matter if they are quote-unquote good or bad. And of course, I was always getting in my own way, prohibiting all the good that I said I ever wanted, even all the way up until just now, 2021, when all of this was right in front of me and I was literally throwing it right back out the door, ready to go find some other schmuck who would treat me like that familiar old garbage I was more comfortable feeling like. So, you know, Frank has often said, I wonder if we'd had gotten together like way back in 2012, how different our lives could have been. But I know that it never would have worked out. In 2012, I was not ready for this kind of love. I would have destroyed him because I was just in such a different place deep down inside. I mean, like, yeah, I've been through it all the way up until this point, and I thought I was ready, but I'll always say it, old habits die hard, and it is constant work to keep reminding yourself that you're enough. I know I had to go through all of that. Again, everything's perfect all the time. I had to walk through those fires that got hotter and hotter each time in order to learn this. I never would have been able to appreciate a man of Frank's caliber way back then. I had to be brought down to nothing to rise up to meet the light of my soul that has forever been trying to get me to rise up. And I'll chalk it up to the fact that I like to take the scenic route, the long way around. After all, life is nothing but experience, and as they say, may you live in interesting times. So I want to break here real quick and offer up a link, and I've put it in the description box below this video. I'd much rather play it for you right here, but YouTube will give me a copyright strike if I do. So when you're through with this video, be sure to check out that link to my favorite rampage, so to speak. Get ready for some chills, and you may even cry because it brings me to tears. It absolutely speaks to me in every way, and I just hope that you'll love it as much as I do. All right, so where was I? I have come to my senses, or rather got smacked around a bit by my oversoul, and I had that huge breaking down moment, and I'll never forget it. It felt like a cracking, really, like the hard shell of protection or maybe stupidity I've been carrying around. It just started to crack open, and it felt as if a light was shining out of me, like just this brilliant light, and I felt so vulnerable and scared, but at the same time, in Frank's arms, I was safe. I was finally safe. And you know, I have to say, I've never really felt safe. This I know. I have pictures of me from when I was really young, and the look of terror in my eyes, just because I was on this planet now, it's the first thing to hit you. It's like, man, why is she so scared? I was always sort of looking up at my mom for security, and I had really bad separation anxiety. My mom was putting herself through community college when I was 3, and my older sister was already in school. So my mom would have to drop me off at the school daycare so that she could go to her class. And I would cry bloody murder for the entire time. I know those poor ladies in the daycare were like, oh, hell no, here come that little Gretchen again, get your earplugs. Because I would not stop crying the entire time I was there. And to me, I swear it felt like forever. It felt like a whole entire day, but my mom told me it was like an hour. Like it was one class that lasted an hour, but I thought she was leaving me there forever, and I wanted everyone to know. So also in my younger years, but later, like in my early 20s, I attempted therapy to try to deal with this sadness and emptiness that had always played out through my relationships. Like I'd always said, when I'm single, I am fine, I am great. But every time I got into some relationship, it was like major breakdown, major emotional breakdown for me. So the best way I could describe it was always that I felt like an astronaut attached to the mothership by one of those long cords, but I was floating out in space all alone. And the ship was in the distance, and I knew that it had been taken over by aliens. And so that probably would be the worst place for me to go, but I just had to get back there. No matter what horrors were on that ship, I was desperate to get back there because I just felt like I was flailing and floating all by myself out in the abyss. So that's sort of like an illustrative picture of what all of my relationships look like literal aliens attacking me. But I definitely felt safer to be in that situation than floating all alone. Even though when I was alone, I always felt like strongest. I don't know. It's this bizarre thing. So anyway, it's unfortunate that I never had a therapist that could actually help me through this. Mostly, I remember one of them saying, well, just stop thinking about that. Like, don't do that anymore. And another one would just sit there and yawn while I cried for an hour in her office. Like, it was really not helpful. So I'm getting sort of away from the topic to describe my very younger years of dealing with this loneliness and disconnect that I've always felt. And then, of course, the validation of both of those things that all of my relationships brought into my life. So it was just always a perfect matchup. I felt lonely and scared, and all of my boyfriends I picked made me feel lonely and scared. See, it's always perfect. So I'm sorry if I'm jumping around a lot. Sometimes when I listen to the playback of this video after it's done, I'm like, oh, I forgot to say this, I should have said that. I'm jumping around a lot, it didn't make sense, but hopefully you're with me still on this. So all right, let's get back to the present moment, where am I talking about? I'm around 2021. I've made some huge strides in the doo-doo head relationship. I just think I didn't give myself enough time to heal, and it definitely came at Frank's expense. But of course we got through it, and only 3 short months later we were moving into our dream house. When we first started looking for houses, I guess it was around August, the first house we looked at, we both instantly knew it was our house. I mean, the house itself is old and it's out of date and it needs work. even still, 3 years later, we've been slowly getting things done just to turn around and have 5 more things that need to be done. But that's the way it goes when you have a house, I guess. But it's the property that we both fell in love with, even more than the house. It already had a garden, which is something some of you may know that I love doing. So I couldn't wait to get that thing up and going. And so I think I've mentioned this somewhere along the line, but Frank is not vegan because he'll eat fish occasionally and he refuses to give up eggs. But everything else he doesn't eat, not even dairy or cheese. He drinks coconut milk instead, and I'll only buy vegan cheese or I make my own. Not to mention he absolutely loves my vegan cooking and he prefers it over any dead animal on a plate any day. So the funny thing about Frank is that he was actually raised vegetarian from birth. His parents ate eggs and cheese, but they never ate animals. And it wasn't until he got into his later teenage years that he started getting curious about eating animals. And then once he got into the bodybuilding thing, he sort of got duped into believing that he needed to eat dead animals to gain muscle. And he'll even admit to himself that he bought into that whole thing, looking back on it. So anyway, he doesn't eat any animals now, but like I said, the occasional fish if he goes out to dinner with his work thing or whatever. And of course he eats eggs every day and he won't stop eating eggs. And he still works out every day and he's not turned into a weak, skinny guy by giving up all those dead animals. But anyway, as far as the eggs go, that was sort of a problem for me, like buying the eggs that we all know the industry and what these poor birds go through to provide all of those eggs. Like, it's horrifying, torturous conditions. If you've never looked at factory farm chickens, I urge you to do so you can see how bad it really is. You know, he was buying cage-free, thinking that he was doing something good, and we all also know that that means nothing in regards to the animal's welfare. It's really just feel-good, happy words. So we agreed that it was better to get our own chickens so that we're not supporting the horrific egg industry. And let me be clear here, while I'm not interested in eating eggs, I will love to take care of and love all the animals on the planet. So it was definitely a win-win situation. He gets his eggs and I get to hold and kiss chickens. This is where the story will develop of what I've learned as a vegan with backyard chickens. And like, I've heard the vegan argument as to why we should not have backyard chickens. And I guess I never really fully understood it. Like I'd always said, but if the animals are cared for and loved, and believe me, mine are spoiled rotten, then how could it be bad? That's a much better life than a factory farm chicken. But I think it wasn't explained in a way, or maybe just my new experience has given me some full understanding of why backyard chickens really is considered exploitative. And it's not in the way that you would automatically think. Like, I'm going to explain it in the next one, my experiences from actually getting these little chicks all the way through to raising them and what we've dealt with up until today, as a matter of fact. I'm going to go into that whole thing, and believe me, the trail traces back pretty far. And so I hope I can explain my experience with this and what I've come to realize now as a vegan with backyard chickens. But I do want to wrap this one up here. As always, I love to hear your comments about everything that comes to your mind as we walk together through my stories. I do love reading your comments, and it also lets me know that I should continue or not. Like, I'm getting a fairly consistent amount of views. There's about 1,000 of you that actually like to hear what I have to say, and strangely, that's no different than my recipe videos. And believe it or not, I'm actually doing better by not making recipes. Isn't that strange? And like I said, I'm going to get into the whole YouTube and website thing in the next episode, or perhaps the one after that. But yeah, let me cut it off here because these tend to go pretty lengthy. As always, thanks for watching, and have a joyful day and be grateful. Oh yeah, don't forget to click that link below this video for a really amazing listening experience. All right, everyone, I'll see you in the next one.